Chair, we have a quorum, so we're ready to start whenever you are.
Great. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the April meeting of the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee. Thank you for attending. And before we get started this morning, I would just like to ask our interpreter, Ruth Monroy, to walk through how to access our interpretation services for today's meeting. Ruth, please proceed.
Yes, thank you. I will repeat this message in English. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, que es el globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular o tableta, presione los puntos suspensivos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. To use the Zoom interpreting feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are located and click on the interpretation icon, which is the world. Then select your language. If you are joining using the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone or tablet, please press the ellipses, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. The clerk has confirmed we have a quorum. Of course, as always, we'd like to thank staff for their efforts in pulling this meeting together. Just wanted to.
Gracias, tenemos quórum.
Thank you, Ruth. Again, we do have a quorum. And so just very quickly, this meeting this morning, we will take in-person public comments followed by virtual public comments. And if you're a member of the public here in the room, please submit a speaker slip to the clerk. For those joining us virtually, please continue to raise your virtual hands at the right time. Participation is possible both in person and via Zoom. I would like to ask SANDAG's financial programming analyst, Michael Turlip, to provide a quick reminder on how the public and member comments will work this morning. Michael.
Thank you, Chair Frankel. So we will be taking both in-person and virtual public comments today. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. In order to provide live comments, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link or by dialing one of the numbers from your phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. Join the meeting by clicking on the Join Webinar link provided in the confirmation email you'll receive upon registering. When public comments are called for on an item, on the Zoom platform, click on the Raise Hand icon in the Zoom toolbar. The chair will call on you by the name you provided. If you're participating by telephone, press *9. The chair will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Okay, I will now move into the agenda on item number 1, and this is public comments, communications, and member comments. This is the opportunity for any member of the public to address the committee on an item not on today's agenda. Madam Chair, are there any public comments on this item? Excuse me, Madam Clerk, are there any public comments on this item?
No, Chair, we have no public comments.
Thank you very much. And to the members, any member comments? Yes, Mr. Halpern.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the item that we chatted about when I was walking in. There was just some curiosity between the audit committee doing its RFP for the SANDAG financial audit. And as part of that RFP, it seemed as if they were soliciting for the ITOC TransNet compliance audit. And I was just curious. I know that staff was going to follow up, but I don't know if that's been brought up to you. The look on Susan's face tell me that hasn't been brought up to her.
No, I haven't looked at the scope of that RFP yet to see how that would be consistent or inconsistent with the RFP that we would be doing here for ITOC. So I can look into that.
Yeah, just a suggestion to follow up on that.
Yeah,
but it also does beg the question, I guess, as to where we are with the status of our current compliance auditor, and if we need to do a solicitation for renewal.
So in answer to the first part of your question, I believe that is regarding the ITOCs or TransNet part of the fiscal audit for ITOC. And for the compliance audit, the contract has been executed, and the subcommittee is working on the focus areas for the audit.
If I just may add some comments to the RFP. So the RFP has 2 possible auditors, one for ITALC and one for the SANDAG audit. The audit committee already completed their evaluations, but a separate panel for ITALC was supposed to do the ITALC evaluation, which wasn't done. So that's something that needs to be clarified with contracts. So contracts should be contacting you, Stuart. I know you're on the ITALC evaluation panel. So I think it's ITALC, Pedro, and yeah. So point is there's a separate panel that needs to evaluate the ITALC portion of that RFP. So we'll follow up with contracts and do it the right way.
Thank you for that clarification, Marcus. Any other member comments? No, seeing none. Okay, we will move on to item 2, which is our agency report. And we're going to hear from Mr. Dijon this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. So as you may know, last month, staff presented the draft fiscal year 24 budget to the Board of Directors, and the budget tells our story, our priorities, and what the agency plans to do in the coming months. And in fact, this year, Susan took the lead of presenting and preparing the budget to the board. And one of her main goals was to revamp the budget so it could be more transparent and easier to read. I think that goal was done. So if you have the chance to go to our website and take a look at the budget, I implore you to do that. I think, as I mentioned, it's much easier to read and you can see all the great things that we do here at SANDAG. The final budget is intended to come to the board next month. Also, last month, our CEO, Hassan, and Dawn, our Director of Innovative Finance, attended the California Transportation Commission meeting to advocate for our region. The work at the CTC impacts what we do here every day. They reviewed many policies, including those that impact our work putting together the Regional Transportation Plan, and the Commission continues to support our efforts to stabilize the Del Mar Bluffs. In fact, they allocated $37 million to the next phase of the project stabilization. Work continues on our priority projects as well. The Otay Mesa East entry received a boost recently. Assembly Bill 427 passed the Assembly Transportation Committee unanimously on the Assembly floor. This bill updates the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry Act to streamline contracting methods and move the project forward. In other news, SANDAG staff are invited to provide technical expertise and feedback to the state on the next regional housing needs allocation. We're also looking forward to the 35th anniversary of TransNet this November. So to celebrate, we have launched TransNet Tuesdays. In fact, if you can pull that up for me, it's a social media campaign that highlights the great things that we have accomplished since the ordinance was approved by voters in 1987. I invite you to follow us on social media to learn about the projects we've delivered in our communities. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And lastly, at our next meeting, I intend to bring to you an update for our next TransNet financing. As you're aware, we have a $2.3 billion program currently. Approximately 17% of the bonds are synthetically fixed with our swaps. Since interest rates have moved up tremendously over the last year, there's an opportunity for us to ultimately get out of our swaps and actually have a net present value savings. Part of the goal is to do that before June 30th because the LIBOR actually goes away, which is what our swaps are tied to. So there's a little bit of a risk there. And also what has happened with the banking industry recently, we're already feeling some of those impacts with our standby bond purchase agreements potentially going to go up in price. So there's opportunity for us to get out and completely fix our portfolio. So we're gathering an investment team right now to do that, and we'll be presenting that to you next month. So with that, Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dijon. Any, Madam Clerk, is there any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. We have no public comments.
Great. And any comments from members? No? Okay. Thank you so much for the report. We'll go ahead and move on to our consent agenda this morning. There are 5 items on consent. And Madam Clerk, are there any public comments on the consent agenda this morning?
I see no hands from the public, no.
Great. Thank you. We'll bring it back to committee members. Yes, Sunny.
If we can pull item number 7 for discussion, I think we need to talk a little bit about it just in general.
Okay. As to staff, when pulling an item, we don't need a motion to pull an item off consent. Okay, that's what I thought. Excellent. Great. Okay.
And I would like to make a motion to approve the rest of the consent.
Great. Thank you, Sunny. So that there's a motion to approve. That would be items 3 through 6 on the consent agenda.
Second.
Second by Mr. Fuller. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you. I did want to mention, excuse me, for the committee that member Michael Kenny has joined us via Zoom. So he does have his camera on and participate in discussion. He does not count toward the quorum though. So just a note for everybody.
Morning.
For real estate right-of-way acquisition, Chair Frankel.
Yes.
For licensed civil traffic engineer, Michael Kenny.
Yes.
For contractor construction, Vice Chair Delgado. Oh, excuse me, Orso Delgado.
Oh, yes. I don't even recognize that part of my last name. I'm sorry. Yes.
For biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
For finance and budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Licensed engineer is absent this morning. And for CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And that item passes unanimously with those members present.
Okay, thank you. So we will then move on to item 7, which is the fiscal year 2018 and fiscal year 2021 triennial performance audit implementation of the recommendation status. And this item was on consent, so I don't imagine that there's a staff presentation prepared for this item. I think, Sunny, if you'd like to begin, we can discuss the item.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for the update. That spreadsheet, it's a very huge spreadsheet and, there's a lot of activities that have been done. So I'm really pleased to see all the completion. But I have some concerns about really completing everything in a timely manner because we are just starting another triennial audit. And new items are being discussed, which will hopefully be the focus of the new audit. There were some concerns I saw, there were some things I saw in there about funding issues or budget or being able to accomplish some of the things that was recommended, especially in the 2018. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if there's any precedence on this, but from 5 years ago, SANDAG has different changes, priorities, and things like that. Has the information that has been recommended, is it still applicable? Is it still valid, with the current status of budgets and funding and, the direction that SANDAG is taking? And I'm wondering if our new triennial audit at least should look at the previous recommendations as part of the new exercise to just see what's relevant, what's not. I really want an honest response to what is your ability to complete, especially the 2018, because there's a lot of things that has been pushed and pushed and pushed. I know you're working on it. So let's just at least have a discussion on it.
And my understanding is included in this next triennial performance audit, they always look back at their recommendations from prior audits and see how we're doing against those recommendations. Just so that you're aware, we are making progress on a lot of the recommendations. We're tied up in what we are working on with the what's the name of the working group? The mobility working group. We're having meetings with them every 2 weeks. And then now they are kind of diving into some of these topics related to the local streets and roads program and other guidelines and recommendations that were put forward through both the 2018 and the 10-year TransNet audits.
Okay, so you're telling me that the mobility working group has this as part of their focus and responsibility.
Correct. The subcommittees that was appointed by the mobility working group. Yes, they have been having meetings regarding those.
Is there a chance or is there something that could become a regular agenda item or a report or progress from the mobility group in our meeting? So related to, ITALK or TransNet related
Mhm.
items so we can have a little bit more updated information as far as what they're doing, how are things going? Is that something that's possible to do?
Yes, so there was a plan to have the recurring reporting, but since there was not a lot to report while Ariana was here, so this has been postponed. I'm thinking that the first update will be next at the next meeting.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Michelle is.
Maybe as part of, like you report on the transportation committee, but maybe we can have, added to that some kind of an update.
Absolutely. And as part of our status update, we can show you what the work plan is, the dates and what we
Okay.
expect to accomplish and when.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. Any other member comments? Yes, Stuart.
Yeah, just follow up on that. I remember some time ago, Ariana had presented a sort of milestones for that mobility work group. And so, yeah, just getting an update on that because, for example, the city of San Diego, and we talked a little bit about this when they were here a couple of months ago, Mayor Gloria has called potholes one of the top priorities of the administration. So sorting out that 70-30 split in the street and local will probably be an important consideration in what they're able to do in that regard. The second thing I just want to raise, and I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think my colleague was also suggesting that because of the time that's gone by since the original or since the last trial performance audit, it's actually reasonable that some of the recommendations in here and management's agreement to remediate or follow up, things have just changed based on the change in the new regional plan. So what I heard was, and I'm not sure I actually heard the answer, so maybe clear this up for me. If there are some things that circumstances have just changed, so certain recommendations really aren't relevant based on what's foreseen in the new regional plan, then we should just kind of cross them off the list. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do. So just want to put that out there. Thanks.
Any other member comments? Item 7. Okay. Madam Clerk, I believe I neglected to ask if there are any public comments on this item.
I'm sorry, Chair, I missed the question.
Sorry, I think I neglected to ask if there are any public comments on this item, item 7.
We do not have any public comments on this item. I was advised by General Counsel, though, I apologize, I missed that. Michael Kenny, if you could state for the record the reason that you're not able to join us in person this morning, and also declare that there's no one over the age of 18 in the room with you at the moment.
Certainly. Unfortunately, I'm ill, so I thought it best for everybody to stay home. Hopefully, I'll test positive. I'll test negative later in the day, and this will be behind me. But I am home until that occurs. And there's no one under the age of 18 in my house currently.
I'm sorry, over the age of 18, so no other adults participating in the meeting with you.
Oh, well, my wife's here, but the door is shut, so that there's no other adults participating in the meeting other than myself.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and thanks, Michael, for joining us via Zoom. Okay, we're going to move on to our reports today. This is item 8. This is actions. Is there a vote required on item 7? I don't believe so. I believe it was an information.
No,
item.
it was just for
information.
Okay,
information.
great. Thank you, Pedro. So again, item number 8 is actions by the Transportation Committee and Board of Directors on TransNet related agenda items, and we're going to go to Zara.
Thank you, Chair Frankel. The board retreat was held on March 9th and 10th with workshops on information sessions about different topics such as SANDAG projects, state and federal requirements, and regional planning process. At its meeting on March 17th, the Transportation Committee recommended that the board adopt, which they did on March 24th, the result of San Diego Regional Active Transportation Program results. Roughly $2 million will go to support the following TransNet Regional Bikeway Program projects: Bayshore to Imperial, Pacific Highway Coastal Rail Trail, Robinson Bikeway, Bayshore Bikeway, Boreal Logan, Phase 2, safety improvements. At its March 24 meeting, the board approved the draft FY 2024 program budget. The board also approved the revised 2023 board meeting calendar and canceled all board and policy advisory committees meetings in August. The board also adopted the resolution supporting May as Bike Month and encouraging member agencies to approve similar proclamations and promote Bike Month activities, including SANDAG Bike Anywhere Day. That concludes this month's updates on TC and board actions. I also wanted to provide an update on the status of the solicitation of the 2 ITAC positions for public finance and biology and environmental science. We have extended the application submission deadline to April 21. We received another application that last week, so we have a total of 3 applications as of today. Thank you all for helping spread the word. Please let potential applicants know that they still have time to submit their application. Additionally, we discussed the format of this report item, the TC and board actions with Chair Frankel and Vice Chair Pedro Orso Delgado at the chair briefing last week, and consistent with streamlining the reporting efforts to the ITAC and in line with ITAC's FY 2023 and FY 2023 and 2024 goal number 2 for SANDAG. Going forward, this item will be moved to a written report or written information item under the consent calendar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zara, for your report. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. We have no public comments.
Great. We'll move it back to members. Any member comments? This report. Oh, okay, seeing none. We'll move on. Thank you, Zara. It's our agenda item number 9. And this is the Independent Auditor's Annual Report on the results of the fiscal year 2022 TransNet compliance audits. And we're going to hear from Marcus on this item. Welcome, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go ahead and present the TransNet fiscal compliance audits. I'm Marcus Pasquale with the Finance Department, and will be introducing this item before handing it off to Kyle Haas, our managing auditor at Davis Farr. In accordance with the TransNet ordinance, the ITAC has the responsibility to conduct the annual fiscal and compliance audits of agencies that receive TransNet funds. ITAC is required to share the initial audit results and its recommendation to the Transportation Committee 60 days prior to its release to resolve any inconsistencies and technical issues. There are 2 components to this item, item A and B. In item A, Kai will be presenting the results of the audit, and in item B, I will go over our member agency eligibility requests, which arise as a result of findings in item A. So with that, I will turn it over to Kyle to present the initial results of the FY22 TransNet fiscal and compliance audits. And after Kyle is done, he can turn it back to me so that I can provide next steps on the item.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you to the committee for allowing us to go over these results for you. Again, this is our summary of results for our audit of TransNet and TransNet extension activities for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2022. So the scope of the engagement here was agreed upon procedures to determine whether recipients of TransNet funds were in compliance with the ordinance for the year ended June 30, 2022. These agreed upon procedures were approved by ITAC in September 2022. During the course of our review, we tested 24 recipient agencies and performed procedures from October 2022 through December 2022. We will get in a little bit here. It's stated that we're pending testing of the City of Poway RTCIP expenditures. We actually did complete that testing, and I'll go over the results as part of that review in just a few slides. There were 8 major compliance components that we did look over during our examination. So the first of which were TransNet expenditures. During our expenditure testing, we select at least 25% of total TransNet expenditures for review. And we also test payroll charges if payroll did exceed 20% of the total TransNet expenditures. All recipient agencies were in compliance with the revenue and expenditure requirements upon our review. Next, we'll go into the maintenance of effort. We did note that all recipients were in compliance for our maintenance of effort requirements, except for two cities. The city of Del Mar had a $72,462 deficit, and the city of San Marcos had a $629,185 deficit as a result of our testing in relation to maintenance of effort. Number 3, our local agency balance limitation, also known as the 30% rule. All recipients were in compliance with the 30% rule, except for the city of National City, which we found to be $795,378 over this limit. For both 4 and 5, our local street improvements, congestion relief versus maintenance, all recipient agencies were in compliance with the requirements that at least 70% of revenues were used for congestion relief projects, and all recipient agencies were in compliance with the requirement to not spend more than 30% of their apportionment on maintenance. Going into indirect costs, we review whether or not the agency applies indirect cost to projects included within the RTIP, and further, what percent of those indirect costs are relative to the actual total of TransNet expenditures. So as you can see here, about half of the agencies that we review, maybe a little bit more than half, do include indirect costs within projects on the RTIP. Various agencies do have plan approvals, some do not, which include indirect costs. As far as the actual percentages relative to total TransNet expenditures, as you can see for 2022, they ranged from 0.52% to 16.44%. We did not note anything that would raise any alarm with regard to the percentages of indirect costs being charged or indirect costs being charged that were not in agreement with the indirect cost plans for which we were presented. Next, the Regional Transportation Congestion Improvement Program, also known as RTCIP. All agencies were in compliance with the exaction fees collected or the requirement for a certain amount per exaction to be collected. And that is except for the city of Coronado, the city of Escondido, the city of La Mesa, and the city of Lemon Grove. And I just did want to note that as far as repeat issues within this particular review, we did not note a finding for the city of Coronado nor La Mesa on this particular issue in 2021, but we did note findings for the city of Escondido and the city of Lemon Grove in 2021. So these are considered repeat findings. Next, all agencies did expend or commit funds within 7 years of collection, with the exception of the city of Poway. So just to give a quick update with regard to the city of Poway, they were actually approaching a 10-year mark, at which point the ordinance requires a return of funds to SANDAG if they remain uncommitted or unspent. However, with discussions that we did have with the city, as it turns out, they were making eligible expenditures for RTCIP projects that were just improperly coded within their own accounting system. So it was these expenditures were being funded through the general fund rather than the RTCIP fund, as intended. So what the city of Poway did was make a journal entry to cover some of those years for which funds had been collected but not committed nor expended yet. And we did review that journal entry along with invoice support for the transactions that are under consideration for our TCIP expenditures and did not note any issues. We did determine that those expenses were eligible for our TCIP projects. So that's our update on the city of Poway with regard to the RTCIP issue that we initially noted. Lastly, for transit operator eligibility, an increase in operating cost per revenue vehicle hour for bus services cannot exceed the increase in CPI, and an increase in operating cost per revenue vehicle hour for rail services cannot exceed an increase in CPI. We did not note any issues this year with regard to transit operator eligibility. So with all of that being said, I'd like to open it up for any questions that anyone might have with regard to the summary that I've just provided.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haas and to Marcus for your presentation. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments on this item?
No, Chair, we do not.
Great. Okay, we'll bring it back to committee members for comments and questions for Marcus or Mr. Haas. Yes, Sunny?
So I was just wondering if it's possible in your summary area to create a table that at a glance we can see the 24 agencies or entities and the 8 criteria, you know, maybe with green or red bubbles or something to just kind of at a glance be able to absorb, you know, who is in compliance, who is not.
Yeah, I actually think that that would be very helpful. Marcus, would you concur on that?
Yeah, I concur. It's just how to design that kind of table, because I know there are on pages 8, 9, and 10 of
Yeah, you have individual tables, but just to see I mean, all you need to do is show the agencies, you know, either vertically or horizontally, and then the criteria, and then a green bubble or a red bubble, were they in compliance or not? You know, they're the ones who are getting paid, so they can come up with how to do it.
Do something like that.
But I just think, you know, this is a multi-page report, right? For us and the members of the public, it'll be a lot easier if you can just grasp it. And I'm glad you're comparing to previous. That was another reason I wanted to see that, so that we can kind of maybe compare to other years and just see a pattern. Is there a pattern being developed or not? I'm a little surprised that Poway went 7 years without being noticed that they're using the general funds instead, right? You said this is a 7-year pattern?
Yeah, if I can respond to that, they actually did have funds that were committed within those 7 years, but that project for which those funds were committed did end within fiscal year 22, which then left them open to that requirement at that point.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Other questions? Yes, Stuart.
So to Sunny's point about seeing prior years, so you can, it becomes more clear if there's a pattern. You know, attachment B, and I can't recall which of your slides covered this, the compliance with the 30% fund balance limitation. In the case of National City, last year they had or fiscal year 2021, they had a $289,000 excess amount. This year, they've got a $795,000 excess amount. You know, just superficially, it looks like that, if you want to call it a problem, is getting worse in terms of trend. I frankly don't recall if in the past we had them come in or we saw a letter from them, you know, explaining the circumstance. But just out of curiosity, this is because there does appear to be, if you will, a pattern over these 2 years, and it's growing. Not a question for you, the auditor, unless you happen to know what the background is on that. Maybe for us as a committee to ask them to provide some explanation. Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. Any other committee member comments? Pedro?
I have a question. As far as the city of National City, what is the recourse, or is there any recourse?
I can take that call. So the recourse is if they have that excess cash amount on hand at the end of the year, we withhold their next year's payments until they can cure that. And the regular financial TransNet financial reports, I see that they have been spending it down. It may just be at the end of the year they have this excess, because this is the excess reported at the end of FY22. So that would be kind of the weakness, I guess, of that kind of procedure. But I think it would still be a good idea for them to explain, like Stuart was saying.
Yeah.
And Marcus, have funds been withheld from National City at this point?
So when we do TransNet payments, we do take a look at a certain report that is provided quarterly, and they, at the time of payment, they are below what they're supposed to be. So we do keep giving them payments, but at the end of the year, it always seems to just kind of go up.
So on an annual basis, they may be not in compliance, but on a quarterly basis, they do find themselves in compliance. So being out of compliance on an annual basis results in no sort of action or remedy there, based on how the payments are structured, because they're done quarterly.
Right. But in the ordinance, the recourse is to follow that kind of procedure to withhold payments until they're lowering their balance. So at the end of the year, if they're above the balance, then we're just pretty much following what the ordinance is directing us to do, if that makes sense. Perhaps something to think about when we do any ordinance changes.
Okay. I have a couple of questions, either for Marcus or Mr. Oster, about indirect costs. Can you explain what's included, what typically is included, what type of expenses would be included in indirect costs?
Yeah, Marcus, would you mind if I took this one?
Go for it, Kyle.
Thank you. Yeah, so indirect costs are typically associated with payroll activities when cities decide to have their own staff either do maintenance, congestion relief efforts, rather than outsourcing those to outside construction companies, anything like that. So that's typically what we're seeing our indirect costs for. There are a few cities that do make allocations just to all funds as a percentage of their balance when compared to other funds within the agency. So that's typically what we're seeing is payroll costs associated in those fully burdened rates for them being actually out in the field.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. And with respect to Escondido and the RTCIP, the impact fee that they've apparently been failing to collect for the past couple of years, an inadequate or a sufficient amount. On the summary, trying to figure out, this was page 124 of our agenda packet, which was the summary of findings by recipient agency. Their management response indicates that they had in fact recovered all under-collected exaction fees. Is that your understanding? Was that supported by the information that you received from the city?
Yeah, Becky, if you're on, can you comment to that? I actually don't hear Becky here, but yeah, typically what happens in those cases, and I'm not exactly sure with regard to Escondido in particular, but with that, what'll happen is maybe a city will undercharge those exaction fees, And we do recommend that the city make any under collections whole within the next fiscal year, but that doesn't necessarily exclude them from having issues in the next fiscal year where maybe they don't update their exaction fee within their system. So they're still charging the old rate, or the prior year's rate. So then we would have the exact same recommendation with regard to additional under collections. This is actually an audit step or something that we review that actually results in the most findings year over year, I would say. And that's typically as a result of just, either the city was late to update those fees internally or just didn't update them at all for the fiscal year. So I can look into exactly what happened with Escondido. Our auditor that managed that particular job is on the call, but I don't think that she's a presenter right now. So I don't know that she could speak to Escondido in particular. But yeah, that's generally what would happen there. Is just a failure on the city's behalf to update to the most recently approved fee.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, Kyle. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties. This is Becky Park with Davis Bar. So in your question regarding Escondido, we were able to verify that they did collect it, but it just happened that it was collected right after the fiscal year 2022 ended. So we were able to adjust it. Thus, the comment in the management response section indicating that they were able to recover on all the under-collected. But because these under-collected RTCIP fees occurred during our audit period, that's why we had to include it as a finding. But we were able to review that they have been collected.
Thank you very much, Ms. Park. Okay, any other questions or comments from committee members? Yes, Stuart.
Thanks. I just wanted to go back, excuse me, to the indirect cost allocation. In prior years, I think the audit subcommittee had some extensive conversations about this. So on page 4, you reference that certain of the entities have their indirect cost allocations plans approved by other entities, right? And then you describe how, if that's not the case, you've noted, as you do in the chart on page whatever it is, when they have explicitly had their own plan approved. But there are a few, and I'm going to go to the chart for a second, bear with me. There are a few, for example, Chula Vista, the city of San Diego, whose indirect cost percentages are, over 10%, arguably, high, where they don't, the last allocation plan approval is an NA, and where they're not footnoted as having that plan approved or reviewed by some other entity. It strikes me that situations like that would be helpful to be called out. And I know you guys in your work, you review those allocation plans. In a scenario like that, where there isn't that type of other entity doing that review, where you have a high percentage, it just might be useful to call it out and for you to actually present to us what the methodologies those particular entities used. It's comforting that presumably you're doing that review and you're not finding any unreasonableness. But when you have a scenario of percentages that high, it just seems to me it sort of stands out. And I think for future reporting purposes, it might be good to flag those. You're nodding, so do you understand the logic of that, right?
I definitely do. And that's something that we could take into consideration, in future years, agreed upon procedures, maybe expanding upon our testing of indirect costs. I do agree with you that would be helpful to indicate or have an additional step potentially for those agencies which do not have their indirect cost allocations approved by an outside agency, or even, haven't been approved for for a while within their own agency. I do agree with that, and that's something that could be taken into consideration in the future during our agreed upon procedures.
If I could add on to that, what Stuart mentioned in this table, attachment E, it's a lot of variations from 0, to all the way to 14% or 16% this year, or not for last year. So there's a lot of inconsistencies. Is it that each city has their own way of doing things and they're not necessarily taking advantage of this opportunity to reduce their direct costs by having it charged to transit? Has anyone looked at, do these cities even know what their rights are, what their opportunities are to be able to take advantage of these and maybe be able to deliver, or increase their ability to deliver projects and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's important to just remember on this particular, the percentages that you're seeing, remember, are relative to the total TransNet expenditures. So it's not necessarily the effective indirect cost rate that they're charging. And those percentages can fluctuate for a number of reasons year over year. Again, whether or not the agency chooses to do their construction or maintenance in-house compared to outsourcing that work, that will definitely affect the indirect cost rate. Whether or not the agency has, projects maybe that were delayed so that not as many indirect costs are applied, or the percentage might go down because projects are delayed because the city is working on other issues. So I think that's important. So the percentages, I'm not going to say that they're misleading because they're just percentages as a relation to their total TransNet expenditures. But I know that we have a tendency just to think, okay, indirect costs, here's the percentage that they allocated. It's not necessarily that case. So it does vary agency by agency. So it is a little difficult to apply, a uniform procedure to agencies that are essentially, doing things their own way, 24 different ways. So
okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Absolutely.
Also related to attachment E, I think that the column that shows the last allocation plan approval, and then the note, it notes that, if it could be not applicable because there is no plan or because the plan is not approved. So I think it'd be helpful to know which jurisdictions have no plan at all. I think that's different to me than a plan not being approved, as compared to a jurisdiction that just isn't planning for, isn't doing any long range planning on indirect costs. So I think that'd be helpful.
I agree. We do have in that column, that third column over, 2022 indirect costs charged to TransNet. Those agencies that did not charge any indirect costs would be represented as a 0 in that column. But I agree. I think that maybe our results for last allocation plan approval, we could further clarify within our not applicable, whether or not it's not applicable because there were no indirect costs charged, or not applicable because it hasn't been reviewed lately.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stuart, yes.
Yeah, sorry, just as a follow-up, one of the things that is always challenging is sort of institutional memory, right? Because committee members change, sometimes staff members change, sometimes audit firms change. So just with regard to the institutional memory, I don't know if this would be something for you, Marcus, to note that for future years, we want to do this little call out if these kind of high percentages return for entities that do not have approved plans, if that will be on you, or just if, I don't know how the institutional memory gets perpetuated on that. Thanks.
Okay, any additional discussion? Seeing none. So we do need a motion to approve this item.
I'll move to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All right, a motion by Mr. Halpern and a second by Ms. House. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair. For real estate right-of-way acquisition, Chair Frankel.
Yes.
For licensed civil traffic engineer, Michael Kenny.
Yes.
For contractor construction, Vice Chair Urso Delgado.
Yes.
For biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
For finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Licensed engineer is absent. And for CEO Private Sector, Sunny House.
Yes.
Thank you. And that motion passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the our team at Davis Farr for joining us today. We appreciate your work and your report. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 10, and
Chair.
I will be presenting this item, and this is the a follow-up discussion. Oh, excuse me, Marcus.
So that was part A. I was going to move on to part B.
Oh,
I think we just
I
did the approval
apologize.
for 9B, but maybe I can go ahead and present 9B. Maybe
Yes,
your,
of course. I
actions
apologize. We are
change.
going to
Yeah.
step back to
Sorry.
9B, our second part of item 9. Thank you, Marcus.
So item 9B, these are going to be the eligibility requests. So part of the procedures are to ensure compliance of local street and road recipients so that they can continue receiving their annual location. We have 2 requests from the cities of Poway and San Marcos. However, Del Mar is also on here for a prior year outstanding maintenance of effort finding, but does not require an eligibility request. I just want to note Del Mar decreased their deficit of $257K to $72K and had no current year MOE findings. We are just reporting on the outstanding MOE deficit that they currently have. Moving on to City of San Marcos, which is for a current year MOE deficit finding, therefore requires an eligibility request. San Marcos had a current year deficit of $39,998 with a prior year shortfall of $589,000. In accordance with the ordinance, San Marcos is requesting an additional 3 years to fulfill the shortfall in MOE requirements for the $39,000. Approval of this maintenance of effort request by the Board of Directors would enable compliance with Section 8 of the ordinance, and the City of San Marcos would be eligible to receive all apportioned FY 2023 TransNet revenues. Should the Board of Directors choose to not approve the request, then San Marcos would remain in non-compliance for FY 22 and would be eligible to receive FY 23 TransNet revenues less the shortfall of $39,000. Our next eligibility request is for the City of Poway. The City of Poway has a finding related to the committing and expending of RTCIP revenues. The ordinance provides different guidance for when RTCIP revenues are outstanding at the 7-year and 10-year mark. So just stating from the ordinance for the 7-year mark, unless a planned need for such fees can be demonstrated and a justification for the delay can be provided that is acceptable to the ITOC, the unexpended or uncommitted portion of the funding shall be transferred to the Regional Transportation Commission to be expended within 3 years on qualified projects within the same region. And regarding the 10-year requirement, contributions to the funding program not committed or expended by the 10th anniversary date of the July 1 following collection shall be refunded to the current record owner of the development project on a prorated basis. So in accordance with Section G4 of the ordinance, the City of Poway is requesting until June 2023 to remedy the unexpected revenues regarding the 7-year requirement. In regards to the 10-year requirement, as Kyle had mentioned in his report, the additional testing done on the RTCIP expenditures was found to be eligible and addresses that preliminary finding. The updated draft has been included as part of item A for ITOC's approval, which you have already approved. I want to make clear, though, that although expenditures over 10 years have been resolved, there are still expenditures outstanding over seven years, but less than 10, which is addressed by Poway's eligibility requests. The eligibility requests are scheduled for consideration at the May 5th, 2023 Transportation Committee meeting, with action on the request scheduled for consideration at the May 12th, 2023 board meeting. Any comments received from the ITOC will be conveyed to the Transportation Committee and the board. That will end my presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. We also have representatives from the City of San Marcos and Poway, should the ITOC have any questions for them as well.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments on this item 9B?
No, Chair, no public comments.
Thank you. So we'll bring it back to committee members for questions for Marcus or our member agencies that are here today. Sonny, yes.
Marcus, can you explain for the city of San Marcos why they're asking for a 3-year extension to spend the 39,000? Is that related to a project?
Let me take a look at their letter.
Seems like a long time for just $39,000.
Yeah, so just glancing at the letter, the 39,000, they weren't able to meet that MOE requirement due to unexpected delays in project start date.
So it is one project that's the funds are allocated to or something that's not
I
expensive.
think, do we have a San Marcos representative available? I think it was Isaac.
Michelle Bender.
Michelle Bender, yes.
I'll promote her.
Yeah, we have their letter, so.
Yes, hi, Michelle Bender here from City of San Marcos. I have Darren Shamau with me as well. Rather than one project, the 39,000, I think you could see we missed our MOE previously by 500,000. We had some staffing cutbacks during our COVID period. So we had some delays on a few of our projects that were off to a slower start because we did reduce our workforce by about 50% for that period. You'll see we're starting to make a lot of progress. We were short 39,000 this last year, and we have a plan, we're on track, and we're back up and running, thank goodness. So that chapter is behind us.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the explanation.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments for staff or the member agencies on this request? Okay, seeing none, staff has asked that we recommend approval of these funding eligibility requests. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Halpern and a second by Vice Chair Orso Delgado. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you. For real estate right-of-way acquisition, Chair Frankel.
Yes.
For licensed civil traffic engineer, Michael Kenny.
Yes.
For contractor construction, Vice Chair Orso Delgado.
Yes.
For biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
For finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Licensed engineers absent. And for CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Yes.
And that motion passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you very much. And thanks so much, Marcus. Sorry to jump the gun on item 10. I was excited to talk about our ordinance amendments and I neglected item 9B, which was very important. And thank you to the city of San Marcos, if they're still on, and the city of Poway for participating. It's always really helpful when we get information directly from our member agencies. So we appreciate that as well. Okay, now we will move on to item 10, again, which is our proposed TransNet ordinance amendments. And this was a continuation from last month where we started the discussion, but we had a number of absences and wanted to continue the item. So I think all the members are very familiar with the ordinance amendments that we presented to the board that unfortunately did not pass with the 2/3 vote required. So the item today is really about our next steps and what we would like to do moving forward with these proposed amendments. We had an opportunity to discuss this briefly in the vice chair briefing, but I wanted to get feedback from other members. And just to start, one of the things that we talked about, we reviewed the outcome and those lists of jurisdictions that were not supportive of the amendments, and we thought it'd be valuable to engage with those jurisdictions directly and their representatives to the board so they had an opportunity to understand our goals and objectives and what we were hoping to achieve with these amendments, as it didn't really appear as if there were any substantive concerns with the amendments themselves. And so hopefully with that level of engagement, with that direct engagement, we would be able to understand if there are any concerns, address those, and present the item to the board at a future time. Secondarily, we have, I think, a decision as to whether we try and bring this as a standalone item to the board again, or whether we bundle these amendments with the other pending ordinance amendments that staff has been working on for some time and does, I think, still plan on taking to the board at some point in the future. So I think that just to open up the conversation, that's kind of what we've been discussing, and I would love to get some feedback from the other committee members.
So one of the things that I've observed, not just at the board meeting at which this was presented, but something that came up at some other board meetings, is I think a number of those entities or representatives that were against this were triggered by the item number 3. I'm looking on page 4 of this particular report. The issue that's come up a number of times at the board about mayors versus council members being SANDAG board representatives. And I don't know if others, have heard that, or if you understand what that issue is, but and I won't try to speak for those people who have feelings about this. But it strikes me that in terms of substance of what we're proposing, that's the one thing that I've heard some discussion by board members that is somewhat triggering, if you will. And my recollection is that this is not something that we on the subcommittee ourselves felt was a compelling thing. I think it was actually suggested by staff as something that might make it easier to convene the selection committees. And so we thought, well, okay, if it's easier for the board to convene a selection committee, fine with us. But I suspect that if we take out the or city council member and we basically leave this one as is, my sense is that that would alleviate objections from a number of the representatives who had voted against it. Because again, just repeating, this was the one substantive thing that I've heard both at the meeting and frankly in some conversation outside the meeting as well. So that would be my recommendation, is for us to consider just removing this, pending whatever discussions you might be contemplating with those particular representatives.
Thank you, Stuart. Sonny.
Thanks for the feedback, Stuart. I think, first of all, we should go back eventually. I would really be curious to learn the feedback directly from the board members who voted against. Before we make any changes, I think, hearing from I don't know how many people have suggested that, but it would be important for the chair probably and staff to do the rounds and get all the feedback we need before we make changes. I also want to know how this ties, or timing wise, what's the amendment for the rest is coming through for us to really make some decisions. We can't make it at this point until we get the feedback and then we know what the timing is for the rest of the amendment, the addendum that's going to come in. So can we get some update on that?
So as far as I know, the other amendments, they are kind of the voting section of that is going to be sometime in 2024.
Okay.
Or at least just take them to the board for their consideration at sometime in 2024.
I have a concern that some of those other addendums are even more controversial than this, ITALK. So if we wait for that, our item could get lost through all the discussions and everything else that happens, related to that addendum as far as changes to the program and things like that. So perhaps if there is an effort to start making the rounds and getting the direct feedback, then I don't know if you want to maintain the subcommittee to go ahead and continue to meet and get that feedback, come up with changes. But that would be my recommendation, is let's hear directly why they voted no, and then we can address that through the subcommittee, or if you want to reappoint a new subcommittee to do that, that would be the way I would recommend moving forward. So.
Thank you, Sunny. Dustin, any comments?
Yeah, no, I echo the sentiment. I would think that complicating it with some additional amendments may not be the wise thing to do, just because I wouldn't want it to be some other amendment that wasn't looked at in a good light, the reason why these current ones didn't get passed. My only thought.
Thank you, Dustin. Michael Kinney, any thoughts on this?
You know, it's very hard to get public officials to reverse themselves after they've gone on record for whatever reason voting in a particular way. So I think we want to consider whether we want to go back to these specific individuals and ask them to do that. Maybe a little time between now and when it goes back for consideration, if it does, and if there was a different makeup of the board, that might be a better time. Just practically speaking, being told once, that's maybe not something we want to consider. Stay in your lane. Maybe we just want to wait a little bit and bring it back at a different point rather than going to individual members and asking them to reconsider.
I don't think we're asking them to reconsider. I think we're trying to get feedback as to what in the addendum they did not like Stuart mentioned, if it's this item 3, well, we can make changes. So when we go back, we won't necessarily take the same thing back. It would be modifications based on feedback. And I agree, Mike, I don't think we should take it back like next month or something like that. I think by the time this evaluation is done and we have had those discussions, it will be probably several months before, or at least a couple of months before we're ready to even go back. So my question is, I think, Stuart, you were on that subcommittee and you're coming off. So then maybe we want to focus eventually on appointing a new subcommittee, maybe with the new members coming on board or at some point when we're ready to discuss that. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the dialogue, just to understand the concerns, if any, is an information gathering exercise, and that will inform whatever we decide to do. It's my hope that we can ultimately get back and get those approved. But I think that sounds like there's some good consensus to take the next step. So I think as far as today, if we could entertain a motion to direct staff to reach out directly to those members that were not supportive of the ordinance amendments and request a meeting. And I think the question is, who I'm happy to meet with those folks. Should it be, the subcommittee? Should it just be myself or Pedro? Should or 3 of us? And I wanted to get some feedback on that. What do you think in terms of the structure of those meetings will be most successful?
Before we go there, can I just point out one thing? A couple of our proposals relate to prior experience regarding the selection committee, right? One was that it's been difficult to convene a selection committee. And in some cases, and I apologize for the indelicacy of me just putting it this way, in the past, some members of the selection committee seem not to be especially familiar with the role of the ITOC and the particular entities. And so some of our proposals relate to that. We're actually going to be having a selection process coming up. So we will also perhaps be informed as to how this new selection works, whether these particular proposals, are still as relevant based on the issues that we've had in the past. So I would just throw out that we should also take into consideration how this next selection process goes as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Stu. We're going to have more information on all fronts. Will be helpful.
And to answer your other question, Chair, I think if we reconvene the subcommittee, we can make decisions as to what the approach should be. And then we can even bring it back to ITOC for review as far as who meets with whom. We got to make sure that legally we have the right number of people there without this being a public meeting and all that. So I would make the motion to go ahead and approach or start the evaluation process with the board members who were not on board with our addendum.
Or just for clarification, was step one really to reconstitute a subcommittee, or did you want to wait until there were new members? to do that?
I would say let's just wait till the new members come on board, if it's okay. I think the evaluation process can continue for now. In the past, I believe when I was the chair, I met with SANDAG staff and the board member. That's sufficient. I think as the chair, you represent us and you can very eloquently describe what the intention was. So we don't necessarily need multiple members, but I think we should just go ahead and get started. So the motion was to direct staff to start the evaluation process by approaching the board members who were not on board with our addendum. And then eventually report back.
Thank you. Do we have a second for the motion?
I'll second.
Great. Motion by Ms. House and a second by Mr. Fuller to direct staff to engage with those members that were not supportive of the ordinance amendment in hopes of scheduling a meeting with them to talk about it. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you very much. For real estate right-of-way acquisition, Chair Frankel.
Yes.
For licensed civil traffic engineer, Michael Kenny.
Yes.
For contractor construction, Vice Chair Ursa Delgado.
Oh, he's gone.
Oh, sorry. I can't see behind the screen. Contractor construction is absent. For biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
For finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Licensed engineer is absent. And for CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously with those members present.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the report items on the agenda. Item number 11 is our future meeting schedule, and the next iTalk meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, May 10th at 9:30 a.m. And that concludes our agenda today. And thank you very much, everyone. We're adjourned.